Mr. Speaker, we are not held in high public esteem right now. Maybe members of Congress would be respected more if we respected ourselves enough to require that when we pass something, it be treated as law. Maybe we would be more respected if we had a firmly rooted expectation that when we pass something as law, it be treated as law. Maybe we would be more respected if we put down party labels and a desire to keep or retain or acquire gavels and picked up the history, the tradition, and the honor of this, the people's house. Mr. Speaker, the House of Representatives does not exist to pass suggestions. We do not exist to pass ideas. We make law. And while you are free to stand and clap when any president comes into this hallowed chamber and promises to do it with or without you, I will never stand and clap when any president, no matter whether he's your party or mine, promises to make us a constitutional anomaly and an afterthought. We make law.
Expired.
The Democrats on your committee say that you've put out a lot of new details, but that they don't really change the fundamental understanding of what happened. And a lot of the broad themes that you've just discussed have been known for years. So at the end of the day, was this the best use of taxpayer dollars and of your time?
It is difficult for me to begin with where I disagree with the foundation of your question, so let me just start at the end of it. Who says that stuff was new? Nobody has ever reported that nothing was headed to Benghazi. Nobody's ever reported that not a single wheel was turning towards Libya. God knows nobody's ever reported who actually evacuated our folks. You may have reported that Secretary Clinton was headed back to Libya in October, but you didn't have the corroboration of the emails, and you didn't know why she was going back. You didn't know about the $20 million memo. First of all, you didn't know about any of the emails from Ambassador Stevens. You didn't know about any of the emails from Sidney Blumenthal to whomever he was emailing. You didn't know that a single U.S. military asset did not meet a single designated timeline. Think about that for a second. The world's most powerful military did not meet a single solitary self-imposed timeline. So,
Chairman mentioned that before the attack ended, no military assets were headed towards Benghazi. But what did start before the attack was over was the political spin. At 10:08 that night, with Tyrone Woods still on the roof of the annex fighting for his life, Secretary Clinton issues this statement, the official statement on Benghazi, the official statement of our government that evening. Some have sought to justify this vicious behavior as a response to inflammatory material on the internet. We know that statement was misleading because an hour later she told her daughter, terrorists killed 2 of our people today. The next day she tells the Egyptian Prime Minister, we know the film had nothing to do with it. It was a planned attack, not a protest. And this public-private contrast continues for days. Publicly telling the American people it was a video-inspired protest, privately telling the truth that it was a terrorist attack. And maybe the best example is from the 14th. Same day Mr. Rhodes issues his talking points. But that day we have Mr. Carney at a press briefing saying this, no information to suggest Benghazi was a pre-planned attack. No information to suggest a pre-planned attack. That same day, State Department official in Libya says this, Benghazi was a well-planned attack. You couldn't have a starker contrast than those 2 statements. And I think it's important to remember this. Don't forget the context. Libya was supposed to be the crowning jewel of the Clinton State Department foreign policy and the Obama administration foreign policy. This was their example of how it works. No boots on the ground, oust the dictator, help the Arab Spring. This was supposed to be how it works. In fact, Jake Sullivan sent an email to one of the things we discovered in our investigation where he talks about leadership, stewardship, ownership of this policy from start to finish. This was something Hillary Clinton pushed for and got done. But maybe the better one is the email from Sidney Blumenthal. A few days after Gaddafi has been removed. He sends an email to the secretary, and he says, this is a big moment. You should do a press event, even if it's in the driveway of your vacation home. And he finishes the email with this statement. This is a big moment. You are vindicated. Don't wait. Help Cleo now. Cleo, of course, is the goddess of history. So they were committed to this. They were invested in this. This was it. This was how it's supposed to work in their administration and their State Department. And they were so committed, it didn't matter that there were 200 security incidents between the time Blumenthal sent the email and when the terrorist attack happened. It didn't matter that one diplomatic security agent went to Benghazi, did his service, and came back. And when he came back, he said this: it's a suicide mission.
Commonsensical that when it comes to national security and public safety, we should listen to and rely upon the women and men who are actually experts and have dedicated their lives to public safety and national security. Mr. Speaker, these are the facts. We don't have sufficient information to appropriately investigate and vet failed nation states. This is a fact. ISIS has sworn to bring its war against innocents here. This is a fact. Administration officials noted ISIS may well use the refugee program to infiltrate our country. This is also a fact, Mr. Speaker. The margin for error is zero. It is zero. And the presumption should always be in favor of national security and public safety because that is the preeminent role of government. And it's our constitutional duty, Mr. Speaker. So unless and until those we place in charge of our national security and public safety can provide the necessary assurances, we should seek to aid those who need aid where they are.
Of genocide committing atrocities across the world. Radical Islamic terrorists are determined to strike our homeland as they did on 9/11, as they did from Boston to Orlando to San Bernardino. And all across Europe, you've seen what happened in Paris and Nice. All over Europe, it's happening. It's gotten to a point where it's not even being reported. And in many cases, the very, very dishonest press doesn't want to report it. They have their reasons, and you understand that. So today we deliver a message in one very unified voice to these forces of death and destruction. America and its allies will defeat you. We will defeat them. We will defeat radical Islamic terrorism, and we will not allow it to take root in our country. We're not going to allow it. You've been seeing what's been going on over the last few days. We need strong programs so that people that love us and want to love our country and will end up loving our country are allowed in, not people that want to destroy us and destroy our country. Freedom, security.
I'm sorry the chairman's not here, so I can tell him how important this hearing is. This may be one of the most important hearings we've had in the United States Congress in a long, long time. People forget the fact that we have a duty, a constitutional obligation as the Congress to do investigations and oversight. And what this OLC opinion does is it undermines the oversight that Congress has under the Constitution. And I don't know why the Attorney General, General Lynch, the new Attorney General, can't just change the underlying policy back to what it was in 2010 so it complies with the Inspector General statute. How in the world somebody can come up with a legal opinion of 66 pages is what I count, 67, and say that the law since 1978 is somehow preempted by these carve-out provisions, and all does not mean all just defies any common sense whatsoever and any legal theory that I'm aware of. It's a responsibility of a judge or a lawyer rendering a legal opinion to try to reconcile and harmonize the law, not to say, well, this this trumps it. We decided in 2010 that that we were going to trump or preempt this means all provision in 1978.
In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the President says that we are scared of widows and orphans. That's what passes for debate this day and age. With all due respect to the President, what we're really afraid of, Mr. Speaker, is a foreign policy that produces so many widows and orphans.
Chairman, gentlemen, are any of you familiar with the name Jonathan Gruber? Mr. Doran, do you know Jonathan Gruber? Do you know that name?
Rings a bell, but I can't call it up.
Anyone? Mr. Rubin, you know Mr. Gruber?
Know the name.
Know the name? You know what he does for, what his occupation is?
I think he's an economist who was enlisted to help with the health care reform.
Oh, yeah. Yes, sir, yes.
Yeah, the famous guy who was, and you know what title he was given when he was the helping with Obamacare and the health care reform? You know what he was titled? Anyone remember? Architect of Obamacare. And, that's one thing, you're the architect of Obamacare and all, but he got a little notoriety in the press and actually had to come and sit right where you guys are sitting a few years ago. Any of you guys know why he was brought in front of the committee and had to sit here? I want to take a guess, Mr. D.
Oh, basically he lied about the cost of Obamacare.
Yes, he was deceptive, right? He said things like this. He talked about the stupidity of the American voter. He said, this is a direct quote. He's out bragging after this thing is passed. Lack of transparency is a political advantage. That's a nice way of saying if you deceive people, you might get your way, right? Might help your case. So here is Jonathan Gruber, architect of Obamacare, talking about deception. Things like if you like your plan, you can keep it. Like your doctor, you can keep it. Premiums are going to go down. Website's going to work. Website's safe. Emergency room. Everything turned out to be false. And now we hear about another person in the Obama administration, Mr. Rhodes. He comes along, and he's given the title, according to the piece in the New York Times, the single most influential voice shaping American foreign policy. Wow, things are starting to sound familiar. And he creates a false narrative as well. Talks about this echo chamber and deceiving the press. And his derision for the press is kind of like Mr. Gruber's derision for the American voter, because he says something like, what's the line he used there? They literally know nothing. Was one of
Mr. Chairman, there seems to be a great deal of confusion as to the purpose of this hearing, which is supposed to be about this current administration, the White House narrative on the Iran nuclear deal. In Mr. Samuel's article, Leon Panetta stated that he, during his tenure as director of the CIA and Secretary of Defense, never saw the letters that Obama covertly sent to Iran's supreme leader in 2009 and 2012. He goes on to say that he would like to believe that Tom Donilon, then National Security Advisor, and Hillary Clinton, then Secretary of State, had a chance to work on the offer they presented. Mr. Duran, let me begin with you. Is there any information confirming that Mr. Donilon or Secretary Clinton worked on those letters?
None that I know of.
Okay. Mr. Rubin, is the circumventing, let's use that word, of relevant department and agency heads in major foreign policy decisions typical behavior for members of the National Security Council and other White House staffers?
It has become a problem that has grown with time, dating back administrations.
So this is common practice these days?
This has become all too common, yes.
Mr. Hanna?
I do think something has changed in that regard. Just the fact that we have a Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications whose job is both to help develop policy, it seems, as closest foreign policy aide to the President, and the guy who is selling it, I think is worrisome. I've got to say that in our administration, you can maybe fault us for a lot, but the fact is that people like Karl Rove, who is in charge of our communications, never sat in National Security Council meetings. There was a pretty strict divide between those two.
Mr. Rubin, back to you. How much undue influence do you believe that these staffers have over national security policy?
As Mr. Hanna said, I believe that this administration has blurred a line that has existed over previous administrations, both Democratic and Republican.
Okay, Mr. Hanna, you mentioned in your testimony earlier that with one bold move, the administration effectively made a radical shift in American foreign policy. Is that a correct assessment of your opinion?
Yes, it certainly is. Yeah.
Okay, the question then comes down to who ultimately is responsible for that shift in foreign policy. Would you say it's Ben Rhodes, other staffers, or the president himself?
No, the policy toward Iran and toward the general retrenchment from the Middle East seems clearly to be President Obama's. He's in charge of that policy.
Okay, and yet there is some influencers, appears to be in his life. Ben Rhodes, as referred to earlier, is recognized as the single most influential voice on foreign policy to the president. So what kind of role did he have in shaping this radical shift?
I don't know, and I do want to have the caveat that this is the shift presented by the policy, although I think it is consistent, as Mr. Duran has said, with the general thrust of the administration's policy toward Iran and toward the Middle East since 2008. I just don't think it's been presented that way. They want to remove and distance themselves from our closest allies in the Middle East, including Israel. And what they tell our allies and they tell the American people is that their relationship is stronger than ever and they will forever have Israel's back. And that's justified by what's presented in the article. And it's that contradiction that worries me so much about what is really going on. Are we having a full and open debate about what we want to do? You've got to hand it to Mr. Trump. At least he says, I want to get out of this place. It's too expensive. It's too costly. Our allies are too much trouble. I want to distance ourselves from it.
So let me clarify what you're saying, because it's troubling to me as well, extremely troubling, that the American people, that Congress, that our allies, when there is such a radical shift of the magnitude of this type of foreign policy, that the American people, Congress, and our allies are not aware of it. So the only way, do you believe the American people and Congress would support a shift that major had they known about it?
No, I think as Mr. Durant said, and Secretary Panetta is in fact quoted in the piece as saying if they'd done that, they'd have gotten the blank kicked out of them.
Absolutely. So the only way to pull this over the American people's eyes and Congress and our allies is by spinning the truth and make people get on board something that is not indeed reality.
That is the extremely strong suggestion of the article, that you had to spin it.
But yes, no, then right down the line, would you agree with that assessment?
Yes.
I'll yield.
Yes.
And Mr. Hanna?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Now the lines that I think Mr. Rhodes used in his piece. Mr. Rubin, you talked about this false choice that I think in your opening statement that Mr. Rhodes set up and used this echo chamber of folks who literally know nothing to further this message to the American people, this binary choice, either it's the deal or it's war. That's what he set up, right? And the thing that strikes me, Mr. Chairman, I won't take my full time here, I just want to make this point is, so this isn't the first time this administration on some big policy decision has deceived the American people. But maybe more importantly, it's not, in my judgment, the first time Mr. Rhodes, on a big policy issue, on a big concern to the American people, has tried to deceive them. Mr. Rubin, you're getting ready to say something. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, the deception comes oftentimes in the way of cherry picking. If we want to look at previous Iranian offers or acknowledgments of letters, for example, what's actually interesting is when Supreme Leader Khamenei, on the 30th anniversary of the seizure of the American embassy, a seizure for which no Iranian reformist or hardliner has ever apologized, mocked President Obama for the letters he was sending and said, we are not going to talk to the Americans until they fundamentally change their position. And so one of the reasons why we need this transparency about what you're saying, is sometime around 2012, the Americans fundamentally changed their position, but didn't come clean to the American people about it.
Yep, I thank you for that. Let me just finish up with this then, just to, I think, make this point. Mr. Gruber deceives the American people on Obamacare. Along comes Mr. Rhodes on the Iranian deal, uses deception to create this false choice and help get this, this agreement passed. And as I said, this is not the first time Mr. Rhodes has done it. It's not the first time the administration has done it. More importantly, not the first time Mr. Rhodes has done it. I think he did it on the Benghazi issue. I think he did it there as well, when he said, in the now famous talking points, which frankly became the catalyst for the formation, the reason the House of Representatives and the Speaker formed the committee, when he created this false choice between, it's not a failure of policy, it's rooted in a video. I mean, straight from the talking points. And so, again, a pattern with the administration, what appears to be a pattern with Mr. Rhodes himself, and then when he's given the ask to come testify, doesn't even have the courtesy to show up. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my 4 seconds. Thank you.
And we'll enter those into the record unless there's an objection.
Thank you.
No objections ordered. Now I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for not only the panel that's before us, but the panel you tried to have before us. Not only did Ben Rhodes not appearing cost us an opportunity to question Mr. Rhodes, it cost us the opportunity and the privilege to ask questions of our friend and colleague, Tommy Cotton. Speaking of constitutional crisis, hauling a United States senator before a committee of Congress would really have created a constitutional crisis. So good thing for us, Tommy was willing to come on his own, and it would have, the background contrast would have been interesting to me. You know, the White House is very critical of Senator Cotton and has been for several months now. Senator Cotton, of course, when he was serving tours of duty in the United States Army in Afghanistan and Iraq, Ben Rhodes was navigating the mean streets of a creative writing curriculum in his post. I mean that literally. That is not figurative. He has a master's in creative writing. And if you're interested in writing haikus and sonnets and novellas, he's probably the right guy. On the other hand, if you're advising the leader of the free world on foreign policy matters, I don't know how a haiku helps. But I would have enjoyed the opportunity to ask Mr. Rhodes how his background prepared him to sell the Iranian deal, but yet Tommy Cotton's background did not prepare him to criticize the Iranian deal. That would have been an interesting dichotomy for me. But what I really wanted to do, Mr. Chairman, was ask Mr. Rhodes to help me, as Gruber did in the past, understand what he meant by certain things. Mr. Chairman, he said, we created an echo chamber. Does the chairman know who we is?
I do not.
Well, certainly he couldn't be referring to other presidential advisors, because he then invoked executive privilege, and he can't be talking about what other presidential advisors said. So it couldn't be that, could it?
I do not know.
Okay. Well, then he said, reporters call us to explain to them what's happening in Moscow and Cairo. And I'm curious which reporters that would be. Which ones call him to find out what's going on in Cairo? But we can't ask him because he's not here. And I would add, he has plenty of time to sit down for what he had hoped to be a fluff piece in the New York Times. He's been on television plenty of times. He had plenty of time to draft memos for the president, but he doesn't have time to come before a committee of Congress. And then this is what really concerns me, Mr. Chairman. In talking about those reporters, he said they literally know nothing. How does someone literally know nothing? He said they were 27 years old, which suggests that they probably have a driver's license at that point. You have to know something to get a driver's license. If they're 27, they'd be eligible to vote in the Democrat primary, more than likely. So you have to know something. So I don't, when you say they literally know nothing, that struck me. I wanted to ask him about that. Also, I think that his appearance today, had he bothered to come, would have created an opportunity for a little bit of bipartisanship, which I know our friends on the other side of the aisle like from time to time. It said he expressed contempt for the editors and reporters at the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the New Yorker. That might have provided an opportunity for some bipartisanship. It would have given us an opportunity to share our own frustrations. But he didn't come. Mr. Chairman, you do a great job leading this committee. It's up to you whether or not you assert the people's right to question Ben Rhodes. But this selective use of executive privilege on one day, but it's not executive privilege on the next, at some point Congress is going to have to stick up for itself. We're going to have to decide whether or not we do have a right to question people. And if you have time to make these comments to a reporter, you ought to be able to come explain yourself. And if you have time at the White House to send a bunch of mean tweets about a guy who served 2 combat tours in Tommy Cotton, and he's willing to come, but the creative writing expert isn't willing to come, at some point this body is going to have to stick up for itself. With that, I'd yield back to the chair.
Mr. Rubin, you talked about this false choice that I think in your opening statement that Mr. Rhodes set up and used this echo chamber of folks who literally know nothing to further this message to the American people, this binary choice, either it's the deal or it's war. That's what he set up, right? And the thing that strikes me, Mr. Chairman, I won't take my full time here, I just want to make this point is, so this isn't the first time this administration on some big policy decision has deceived the American people. But maybe more importantly, it's not, in my judgment, the first time Mr. Rhodes, on a big policy issue, on a big concern to the American people, has tried to deceive them. Mr. Rubin, you're getting ready to say something. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, the deception comes oftentimes in the way of cherry picking. If we want to look at previous Iranian offers or acknowledgments of letters, for example, what's actually interesting is when Supreme Leader Khamenei, on the 30th anniversary of the seizure of the American embassy, a seizure for which no Iranian reformist or hardliner has ever apologized, mocked President Obama for the letters he was sending and said, "We are not going to talk to the Americans until they fundamentally change their position." And so one of the reasons why we need this transparency about what you're saying, is sometime around 2012, the Americans fundamentally changed their position, but didn't come clean to the American people about it.
Yep, I thank you for that. Let me just finish up with this then, just to, I think, make this point. Mr. Gruber deceives the American people on Obamacare. Along comes Mr. Rhodes on the Iranian deal, uses deception to create this false choice and help get this agreement passed. And as I said, this is not the first time Mr. Rhodes has done it. It's not the first time the administration has done it. More importantly, not the first time Mr. Rhodes has done it. I think he did it on the Benghazi issue. I think he did it there as well. When he said, in the now famous talking points, which frankly became the catalyst for the formation, the reason the House of Representatives and the Speaker formed the committee, when he created this false choice between, it's not a failure of policy, it's rooted in a video. I mean, straight from the talking points. And so, again, a pattern with the administration, what appears to be a pattern with Mr. Rhodes himself, and then when he's given the ask to come testify, doesn't even have the courtesy to show up. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my 4 seconds. Thank you.
Having seen the Gang of Eight briefing, having seen this new report, do you believe that what the Russians did cost Hillary Clinton the election?
I would say this, regardless of the outcome of the election, the American people have a right to know what a foreign power did to disrupt our election. And that's really the point. It doesn't matter. I mean, it matters who won.
Do you think it affected the outcome?
I'm sorry?
Do you think it affected the outcome?
Well, when you see the report, you'll make a judgment about that.
But what's your judgment? That's what I'm asking.
Well, I have thought that I've said all along that the Russians' disruption of our election, which is clearly evident in their, when you make a judgment about these things, you look at what is the source? What is the source of the disruption? What tools does that source have at its disposal? What is the path they have to the target? And I think when you see this report, you will see with confidence how the intelligence community has identified what we have seen, and I knew from the disruption at the DCCC. We knew it was the Russians, not from any classified information because I could never disclose that, but from our own investigation, which was costly, to identify the source, the tools, the path, and the target. There is no question that the Russians disrupted, and then they released the information so that to a source that, and this is the path, which would then, on a partisan basis, only release Democratic emails. I really say to you, my friends in the press, with all the respect for the guardians of the First Amendment that you are, that you were accomplices in this. Because every single day you reported that there was an email that was embarrassing to the Clinton administration without saying this is, we know this because of disruption by a foreign power into our electoral system. You knew that. You knew it was the Russians. And so, did it affect the Clinton campaign? Of course it did. Of course it did. Would it have come out differently? I don't know, because there are many factors in an election. But you read the report, and then we'll talk again about what the purpose, the source, the tools, the path, the purpose, and the target, and that would be the purpose, the target of it.
Our remarks today are based on a highly classified assessment that was produced by the three agencies represented here, the CIA, FBI, and NSA, at the request of President Obama, which we, as you also indicated, released publicly in a declassified version last Friday afternoon. Report covers the motivation and scope of Moscow's intentions regarding the U.S. election and Russia's use of cyber tools and media to influence U.S. public opinion. I want to make clear that this report does not, repeat, does not assess the impact of Russian activities on the actual outcome of the 2016 election or draw any conclusions in that regard one way or the other. And this is exactly what we did here. Let me start by, with respect to the findings, is that we'll first address Russia's goals and intentions. We have high confidence that President Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. The goals of this campaign were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. Putin and the Russian government also developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. Russia aspired to help President-elect Trump's election chances when possible by discrediting Secretary Clinton and publicly contrasting her unfavorably to him. Moscow's approach evolved over the course of the campaign based on Russia's understanding of the electoral prospects of each of the candidates. When it appeared to Moscow that Secretary Clinton was likely to win, the Russian influence campaign began to focus more on undermining her future presidency. Moscow's influence campaign blended covert intelligence operations with overt efforts by Russian government agencies, state-funded media, third-party intermediaries, and paid social media users. We're highly confident that the Russian intelligence services conducted cyber operations against people and organizations associated with the 2016 U.S. presidential election, including both major U.S. political parties.
Director Comey, let me talk about forensics for just a minute, because the FBI has the expertise there. And I know there's tremendous investigative value when the FBI is actually able to conduct their own forensics review on devices that have suffered cyber intrusions and attacks. I believe there's some confusion, though, or at least some conflicting reporting as to whether the FBI requested access to the DNC's services, the Democratic Congressional Committee servers, and John Podesta's personal devices. Did the FBI request access to those devices to perform forensics on?
Yes, we did.
And would that access have provided intelligence or information helpful to your investigation and possibly to the findings included in the intelligence community assessments?
our forensics folks would always prefer to get access to the original device or server that's involved. So it's the best evidence.
Were you given access to do the forensics on those servers?
We were not. We were a highly respected private company, eventually got access and shared with us what they saw there.
But is that typically the way the FBI would prefer to do the forensics, or would your forensics unit rather feel the servers and do the forensics themselves?
We'd always prefer to have access hands-on ourselves, if that's possible.
Do you know why you were denied access to those servers?
I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure.
Was there one request or multiple requests?
Multiple requests at different levels, and ultimately what was agreed to is the private company would share with us what they saw.
There's been much debate over the content released by WikiLeaks. Director Clapper, and I should say DC Leaks, and what the intentions were behind those disclosures. Director Clapper, you made it perfectly clear in your testimony that the community feels that vote tallies were not altered.
That's correct.
Do you believe there's any evidence that the DNC or the DCCC or the Podesta emails released publicly were altered in any way?
We have no evidence of that.
Director Comey, do you have any intelligence that any Republican system that was targeted by these same groups was either successfully penetrated, or if penetrated and there was data exfiltrated, was there any exfiltration?
There were successful penetrations of some groups and campaigns, particularly at the state level on the Republican side of the aisle, and some limited penetration of old Republican National Committee domains.
Penetrations of those National Committee domains?
Right, they were no longer in use.
Okay. And from a standpoint of Republican candidates that were running for president, were those campaigns, any of those campaigns, targeted under the same effort by the Russians?
The campaigns themselves, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Has ended his intervention, and also work Mr. Kamal started. But I don't understand something not of your intervention, Mr. Kamal. You're first of all saying, yeah, that is not done. And then you are saying two phrases later, but we have to accept it because he is elected. No, it is not because he is elected that he can go against human values and the values of the United States of America. Even an elected president with a majority, and he has no majority of the popular vote in the US, have to listen to the American Constitution, has to listen to the American judiciary. And that is my start of my intervention. In fact, people are saying, or some people are saying in the US, yeah, it helps security. Well, it's nonsense. You have given the figures. Since 1975, all terrorists in the US came from 3 countries: Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Lebanon. None of them is on the list. It are 7 countries, and nobody came from that country since 1975 as a terrorist. So it's pure discrimination. And pure discrimination in a more broader approach, but because it's not only about this religious ban. It's about, fueling populism and nationalism for the moment, what the Trump administration is doing. And that's not only by appointing Mr. Farage as his spokesman here in the plenary, but it's also by having the idea to designate Malloch as the ambassador, and more important, let's be aware of that, Steve Bannon, member now of the National Security Council of the United States of America.
Yeah, I think the same thing. I think if you look at the lines of work, I kind of break it out into 3 verticals or 3 buckets. The first is kind of national security and sovereignty, and that's your intelligence, the Defense Department, Homeland Security. The second line of work is what I refer to as economic nationalism, and that is Wilbur Ross at Commerce, Steve Mnuchin at Treasury, Lighthizer at Trade, Peter Navarro, Stephen Miller, these people that are rethinking how we're going to reconstruct our trade arrangements around the world. The third, broadly, line of work is what is deconstruction of the administrative state. And if you... So I think the three most important things, I think one of the most pivotal moments in modern American history was his immediate withdrawal from TPP. That got us out of a trade deal and let our sovereignty come back to ourselves. The people, the mainstream media don't get this, but we're already working in consultation with the Hill. People are starting to think through a whole raft of amazing and innovative bilateral relationships, bilateral trading relationships with people that will reposition America in the world as a fair trading nation and start to bring jobs, high value added manufacturing jobs back to the United States of America. On the national security part, it was certainly the first two EOs that you've started to see implemented here over the last couple of days under General Kelly, and that is the rule of law is going to exist when you talk about our sovereignty and you talk about immigration. General Kelly and Attorney General Sessions are adamant, that, and you're going to start to see, I think, with the defense budget we're going to talk about next week when we bring the budget out, and also with certain things about the plan on ISIS and what General Mattis and these guys think. I think you'll start to see the other part of that. But the third, this regulation, every business leader we've had in is saying not just taxes, but it is also the regulation. And I think if you look at these cabinet appointees, they were selected for a reason, and that is the deconstruction. The way the progressive left runs is if they can't get it passed, they're just going to put it in some sort of regulation in an agency. That's all going to be deconstructed, and I think that's why this regulatory thing is so important.
We had a man who is openly saying we want a worldwide right-wing movement to get rid of the European Union, to get done with the European Union, and there they are sitting here. It's our fifth column, because Mr. Farage is working with Mr. Bannon. He sees him on a regular basis to, in fact, one thing, that's to see how the European Union can be destroyed in the coming years. Not thinking, dear colleagues, on one thing, it's a big risk to bet on nationalism and populism in Europe. We got that already in the past. We got already in the 20th century people who thought that nationalism and populism was the solution for our continent. And they have created the gruesome atrocities we have ever seen. 20 million deaths, Mr. Farage, have nationalism caused in Europe. And there is no family in the European Union who have not a grandfather of a grandmother or a son of a daughter who was not victim of that nationalism and of that populism. And that's the reason why we have created the European Union, to overcome that, to make a continent of peace. And I think what I see for the moment, that is an American president. Normally, what doesn't do an American president? Take Roosevelt, for example. He wanted to be the leader of the free world. I'm now seeing an American president who wants to be the leader of the fight against the free world, against solidarity and against tolerance. And I think it is an existential moment, Mr. President, for the European Union. We can only take one decision. We have the autocrat Putin who wants to divide Europe. We have President Trump who have a populist nationalist view and want to disintegrate us. We have the threat of the radical Islamists in the south, and we have our bunch of people here who want to destroy inside the European Union. We can do one thing, that is unite us, fight back as the European Union, and I hope in La Valletta it will not only be the letter, and I support the letter of President Tusk on this behalf, that will be the conclusion. I hope for once that all European leaders have the courage to stand up together with the European Parliament and fight back this bunch of nationalists and populists who wants to destroy us.
Thank you. Well, I can see that you're all very upset here this afternoon, and I've no doubt that the events in the USA over the last few weeks have been a very profound shock to you. Perhaps you're right. You see, what has happened here is somebody has stood on a manifesto for election, got into office, and within 1 week said that he will hold faith with his own electorate. It is called genuine democracy. Unlike the system we have in the European Union, where the unelected commissioners like Mogherini here have the sole right to propose legislation. So I'm sure that it's a great shock to you to see that a genuinely elected Democrat is doing what he was put in to do. And it must be It must be, I would think today in Washington. Sorry. I can't hear you, mate.
Di questo Parlamento e delle funzioni istituzionali.
This Parliament has institutional functions, as does the Commission, out of institutional respect to the Commission, but also as a result of the Commissioner's President. We need to be polite, please. So, thank you.
And out of institutional respect, President, to the truth, perhaps you will understand and agree with me that within the European form of lawmaking, it is the unelected Commission that have the sole right to propose legislation. If I'm wrong in saying that, you can throw me out of this Parliament right here, right now, this afternoon.
Onorevole Farage, io la
Mr. Farage.
richiamo soltanto a un atteggiamento rispettoso.
I am just asking you to be a little bit more respectful, please. Thank you. You may continue.
Oh, I'll be respectful, all right. And perhaps you will be too, for the right of the leader of a political party that won the European elections in the United Kingdom in 2014. Now, it seems to me that actually, with all the anti-Trump rhetoric that is coming from everywhere, actually what we're hearing is the true nature of the European project, which is genuine anti-Americanism. Trump is motivated by protecting the United States of America from Islamic terrorism, whereas what has happened in this room and in governments around Europe is you have welcomed these people into your own homes. But can we please, just for a moment, look at the facts? Amongst all the hyperbole and the hysteria, all that Donald Trump has done is taken 7 countries that were identified by President Obama as posing a risk to the USA. Obama already had put in place extreme vetting. What Trump has done is for 90 days to say, let's examine that vetting and see whether it's good enough. But I want to ask you, Mr. Verhofstadt, and all the others, with your faux outrage today, where were you when Obama in 2011 banned any Iraqi from going into the country for 6 months? Why do I hear no criticism in this chamber or from the Commission of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain and others who refuse to take a single, not one, refugee or displaced person from Syria? And how can it be that on Holocaust Day, last Friday, not a single one of you criticised the 16 countries in the world that ban Israeli Jews from even going to their country on holiday? What is this hypocrisy? So perhaps what we need to do, Mr. President, and through you to the members, perhaps what we need to do is to be a little bit more constructive. All of us here say we're Democrats. Well, here's a chance to prove it. Let us invite President Trump to come here to this European Parliament. I'm sure as Democrats you'd all agree that what we need to do is to have an open dialogue with the newly elected, most powerful man in the world. And if you throw that rejection back in my face, then you prove yourself to be the anti-democratic zealots that I always thought you were.
Could we have a microphone for the speaker, please?
Grazie, onorevole Verhofstadt.
Thank you, Mr. Verhofstadt.
Onorevole De Graaf per il gruppo
Mr.
INF.
De Graaf now for the ENF group, please.
Do not allow anyone to tell you that it cannot be done. No challenge can match the heart and fight and spirit of America. We will not fail. Our country will thrive and prosper again. We stand at the birth of a new millennium, ready to unlock the mysteries of space, to free the earth from the miseries of disease, and to harness the energies, industries, and technologies of tomorrow. A new national pride will stir our souls, lift our sights, and heal our divisions. It's time to remember that old wisdom our soldiers will never forget, that whether we are black or brown or white, we all bleed the same red blood of patriots.